JT Crowley is Talking Books. On the show, you'll hear from emerging talent and seasoned veterans from around the world.
Hello, I'm JT Crowley, the host of Talking Books show on Web Talk Radio. And today my special guest is Dr. John Minkler from Fresno in California. He's joining me to talk a bit about himself and the work the Civic Education Center does supporting young people from all backgrounds in his hometown, Fresno. And of course, the book he has written, everyone. The book is important. It's there, it's supporting the work that he does with the Civic Education Center. And it's an organization that supports young people from all backgrounds, creeds, denominations. It's there for young people. So I'm going to invite him on the show because he knows more of what's in the book than I do, because I've only just glimpsed at it. But as he wrote it, well, he sure should know what's in it. So I'm going to invite him on the show to see what is it about and who is he. John, would you care to come and join me all the way from Fresno in California?
Yes, thank you, John, for this opportunity. I'm excited about sharing what the work is because I feel really strongly that um, the younger generation is facing challenges that are extremely complicated and dangerous, and that we haven't prepared that generation through our public school system to be able to address those issues. I've been teaching since 1971, mostly history and civics. Uh, I also have three kids and seven grandkids, and I'm concerned about the world that they're going to grow up in.
So, you've introduced yourself a little bit there, but could you just briefly tell us, what the work of the Civic Education Centre is about, plus why you felt the need to write the book, and, what's the contents about? Just very briefly before we actually go into all the chapters, everybody.
Sure. So I've been teaching civics and social studies for many years, and the traditional way is called direct instruction, where the teacher gives lectures to students in sitting in rows, and you ask the students to read the textbook and answer questions on a test. And what I discovered over many years is that even if I try to make it interesting and I try to find ways to apply what the students are learning to what's going on in the world, at the end of the day, they really don't learn that much. They don't understand the basic values, and they certainly don't know the skills to be able to participate in the democratic process. So I began in the 1990s. I began in having students do civic engagement projects where they identify a real problem in the school or the community. They do research on that issue. They look at and even talk to organizations and government agencies that are working on that issue. And then they come up with an action plan to actually help solve that real problem. And then they work together as a team to implement their plan. So what I found was that it has a transformative effect on students because for the first time, they realize that they have agency, they have the ability to make a change and to participate in the democratic process. And they begin looking around and identifying other things that need to be solved. And you can tell, and I've worked with students who went through that process in the 90s and the early 2000s, and they ended up becoming really actively involved and even becoming teachers or becoming politically engaged. So it's a method of teaching social studies that empowers students to understand how the system works. That's civic intelligence, understanding how the system works and understanding how they can participate in making the changes that are needed to improve their school and their community.
So why the book? Do you think this is necessary? Do you think this is important?
Yes. Um, well, one reason I wrote the book was that uh, many administrators in public schools in California and the United States are reluctant to even listen to a pitch. We're a nonprofit organization, we contract with school districts, and they're reluctant to give me time to explain why civic engagement is a really important strategy for young people to learn how to become responsible citizens. They give me 3 or 4 minutes, and I got frustrated with that. So I spent 2 years writing this book that includes the rationale. Why is it important? What are some examples? What does it look like? How does it work? And so now, if I only get 3 minutes, I'll just hand them a copy of my book and say, "Here, read the. If you're interested, read this." So that was part of the motivation for it. But also, um, let me tell us a quick story that I think includes the real reason for this book. And that is a couple weeks ago, I was teaching a class, one of our lessons on at a low income school and in Fresno, and the announcements came on. So everybody just sort of stops talking because the announcements are pretty loud. And at the end of the announcements, the person said, "Okay, I want everyone to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance." And so my team, there were three of us from the Civic Ed Center. We stood up. One person out of 25 students stood up and they recite the pledge. So we recited the pledge. And then we had a conversation with the students afterwards, and we said, we're not going to judge you, but we're really curious why you didn't want to stand for the pledge. And the answers were like, um, well, Black people have been treated so badly, with slavery that we don't feel like we owe anything to this country. And other students were saying, these are high school students, the government isn't working for us. We don't feel an obligation to, to pledge allegiance to this government. The police don't treat us right, and so on. And what I realized, we're not preparing the next generation to understand how our country began, what the fundamental founding principles are, how it works. Yes, there are problems. We need to acknowledge that, but every generation has made contributions, and the freedoms have extended to more and more people over the centuries. And now we face challenges, but we have to approach it with the attitude that we're going to fix it, not that we're going to burn it down. And that's how a lot of students feel right now. So I think we're at a really critical point in history where if we don't find a way of um, engaging the younger generation and inspiring them to live up to the principles that our government was founded on, then we're at a real risk that they're going to tear it down.
Okay, so let's have a look at this book then, because this is what the book is there for. Um, Now, there are 12 educative chapters to this book, and it's a relatively short book, everybody. So the chapters are short, they're punchy, they're to the point. Now, John and I are going to touch upon all the 12 chapters, so that we're going to give you, the audience, a taste of what you can expect from his informative book. If you want to know more, then you can click on the Amazon link, which accompanies the written introduction of this interview. Or you can go to the web page. Now that's important, everybody. Go to the web page first, because there you'll find out more about the work John does. And the web page is www.civicedcenter.org. And you can discover what they're about, because that's going to give you the real flavor on the essence of this book. Plus on there, you can scan the QR code and you can get the book, or you can click the donate button and make a donation to the organization. Either way, go and have a look at the webpage. It's fantastic, everybody. And the youth people are on there are phenomenal. So this interview is about the book and the work that John is doing. Now, you are the director of the Civic Education Centre. But I believe the CEO at the time of your book, or it was now, was Dr. Stephen Morris. And he, in your book, states that you're asking two relevant questions. And those questions are, do we understand and appreciate what our ancestors gave us? Plus, what are we willing to do to sustain our American Republic? Very poignant questions. So let's explore the book. John, I want to go directly to the first two chapters, Civic Intelligence and Unity from Diversity. When I look at your opening chapters, I see you talking about the after effects of the World Trade Center's attack, Ronald Reagan and him talking about government is not the solution to our problem, government is the problem. Interesting comment there. Civic intelligence, and you were talking about Howard Gardner's definition of intelligence, Daniel Goleman's emotional and social intelligence, Albert Einstein, America's adversary legal system, plus a whole host of other things. You've got a lot packed into these first two chapters. So, what are these chapters about, John, and what can the reader garnish from them?
That's a big question.
It's a very big question.
You're a good questioner.
I
So,
know.
just to quickly refer to that Reagan quote that government's not the solution, it's the problem. If our system of government is a representative democracy, the word democracy means the people rule. It came from ancient Greece, demos, cracy. So the people rule. We have a republican democratic system, but the people are responsible for the government, for governing themselves. So if the government is the problem, then the people are the problem. The people aren't prepared, they aren't participating, they aren't coming up with creative solutions. So that's why I included that quote. I think it's important. There's a lot of anti-government sentiment right now, and I hear that a lot from students. But I say to them, what are you going to do about it? If we were in a dictatorship, then you just have to resist and hide. But if we're in a democratic republic, then it's up to us to identify problems and do something to correct those problems. And if the system isn't working right, then we need to fix the system. And that gets to civic intelligence. Um, Emotional intelligence is about being able to manage your emotions, um, being aware of your emotions, um, mindfulness. There's all a lot, and it's really important. And they're just starting to talk to students about this. Social intelligence is more has to do with relationships. How clearly can you communicate with other people? How well can you listen to what they're really saying? How can you resolve conflicts? How can you engage in civil dialogue with other people and with respectful listening and speaking so that you can really gain the benefit of healthy relationships? And the third, what I feel is missing is there's another level of intelligence, just one level larger, that's civic intelligence. That's uh, our our self-government, which goes all the way down to the classroom. Are there agreements in the classroom of how the students are going to behave? What about the rules in the school? Are they fair? Do they need to change? What about the city? What about the state? What about the nation? What about the world? We're really struggling right now because the United Nations isn't doesn't have the capacity to do what it's supposed to do. So that's civic intelligence, is understanding those systems and understanding how to think through uh, potential changes that will lead to the kind of world we want to live in. Let
Wasn't
me give
it
it a
wasn't
sure.
it John F. Kennedy who says, I think I'm right, Ask not what my country can do for me, but what I can do for my country.
Exactly. Yes. So, uh, civic intelligence is that awareness that we're not only here for ourselves, we're here for healthy relationships, but we're also here as part of a polity. We're here as part of a civic um, democratic process. And if it's going to be successful, we have to be aware of it. We have to be aware of the civic values, and we have to know how and be willing to participate.
Okay, let's explore your book a little bit more. Let's go to chapters 3 and 4, which you head up: the allegory of the cave and secrets of the Great Seal. And of course, the allegory of the Great Cave is going into nature. And of course, allegory, I understand, is really the story behind the hidden story behind the story. And I thought, chapter 4, Secrets of the Great Seal. Of course, the Great Seal, you see on the American emblem. It's very, very important to the American people. But what intrigued me most here, John, was that chapter 3, the allegory of the cave. You've titled that the same as Plato's chapter 7 in his book, The Republic. And I thought, that's interesting. I thought, why has he done that? So that'd be interesting to see what we've got to say there. But when I looked at these chapters now, you're talking about a trip to the Yosemite National Park. You're talking about Shelton Johnson. You're talking about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., about that dream speech, and the Great Seal of the US, the founding fathers of 1776. Now, they didn't get it right. They acknowledged that, in the Declaration of Independence, it was very loose. They didn't get everything right. Racialism wasn't sort of, eradicated there and then. But you've included so many ideologies in these two chapters. So, what's the story behind the story here?
All right, more good questions. Let me just briefly talk about the allegory of the cave.
Please
It's
do.
one of my favorite stories by Plato about Socrates. Um, and the people were all chained in a cave, a dark cave, and all they could do was look forward, and they saw shadows on the wall, and the shadows were made by people who would stand in front of a fire and make the shadows look like animals and look like people, and there were stories that went along with it, and it sounded and they felt like that was their reality. That was the world. What they saw, those images they saw on the wall of the cave was reality. And then one person was able to escape the chains and turned around and saw that this was all a show, that this was being done by a certain group of people who wanted to manipulate the people in chains. He then walked out of the cave and was blinded by the sun and saw that there's a reality out there that's very different from what's in the cave. And he went back in the cave to tell the people who were chained that they needed to escape, and he was killed. They weren't ready to accept. He was a prophet. He was saying there's a dream, there's a vision out there, and they weren't willing to accept it. So what I see as the analogy is social media and television. And think how many hours a day adults and students are sitting there looking at images on a screen as if that was reality. And to me, that's very similar to what Plato was talking about in the allegory of the cave. And we have to understand how much the minds of students and the the worldview of students is affected by social media. And so that's the allegory of the cave. The one of my favorite lessons is the Great Seal of the United States. On the same day that the founders signed the Declaration of Independence, apologies to the British folks who who are listening, but they were writing a letter to King George saying, we're gonna create our own country. You no longer have authority here. The same day that they signed that, 4th of July, 1776, they appointed a committee of 3 men to design a symbol for their vision of this new country. And they must have had a really clear vision because they were committing treason. They knew the British Army was going to come after them and kill them if they could. So they did have a strong vision, and the vision was developed into the Great Seal of the United States. It was Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and Benjamin Franklin was the committee. And I don't have time to explain it all but there's a chapter in the book that gives all the details of what the Latin phrases mean, what the images mean. Um, for example, in the eagle's beak is a banner that says "E pluribus unum," from many into one. And the founders declared that that was the motto that they felt we needed to live up to. If this country is going to be successful, we have to learn how to appreciate the diversity. In that case, at the time, it was the diversity of the 13 colonies, and we have to come together as one to be able to win the Revolutionary War and to start this new nation. And so there's a lot of meaning in that, but very few teachers even know the meaning of E pluribus unum and the Great Seal. It's not in the history books in this country. I'm really disappointed because I've been talking about it since the 1970s. I've gotten a great response from the National Council of the Social Studies, the California Council of the Social Studies. I just did a presentation last week. And when the teachers hear about the meaning of the Great Seal, they're delighted and they're anxious to teach it. And anyway, um, that's one example of the seal. The other one I'll just mention briefly because it relates to the civic engagement projects, and that is the unfinished pyramid on the other side of the seal. The founders said that the Roman numeral 1776 is the foundation of this country, but that each generation had to make a contribution. It's unfinished because they said it will never be perfect. They knew that it wasn't perfect, and they said it will never be perfect. But each generation has a responsibility to make a contribution, to look around and see what problems need to be solved. How does the system need to be improved? And then do the work to make that happen so the next generation can do the same. So the unfinished pyramid is really a message from the founders to each generation that follows that they have a responsibility to identify the most serious problems and do something to help solve them. So when I talk to students, why should they do a civic engagement project? That's our work, is we work with teachers and students to help them identify a topic and do the research and plan a project and implement their project. So the reason we tell them is because their generation has a huge responsibility. They're going to have to deal with things like climate change and economic chaos and racism and all kinds of problems, war, and in order for their generation to be able to address those issues, they have to have the knowledge, the skills, and the values to be able to solve civic problems. So we're asking them to do a small project, but we're guiding them through the process so that they can learn the knowledge, the skills, and the values to solve real problems in their school or their community and eventually the country and the world. So that unfinished pyramid is a great reminder, and it's on the dollar bill. Students see it every day, but they had no idea what it meant.
Mm. I have to say, I didn't know what the Latin translation was on the Great Seal, but I do now. Um, So let's go a little bit further into the book, John. Let's head off to chapters 5 and 6. So we're just sampling what's in each chapter, everybody. And I have to say that these chapters really caught my attention, particularly chapter 5, Democracy in Action. That's very important. And you highlight four critical issues students identified because this at the youth summit, because this is about the youth summit. And so you asked them what, these teens, concerned them. And four issues came up. Violence and abuse of girls and women, school reform, youth voice in school, and safety in the community. So these were the four issues that came up at the youth summit, and which was Fresno County. And you talk about community changes, and you talk about honor our ancestors, and you talk about a whole lot of theories and points of view. And I look at the work of the Center for, Multicultural Cooperation Developments and Intergenerational Storytelling Program. So, John, very briefly, tell us what's the relevance of these two chapters here to the overriding storyline of the whole book. Where does it fit within the remit of your work and this book, these two chapters?
So I was talking about the challenge for the younger generation to address some really complex problems, and that it begins with learning the knowledge, skills, and values of being able to solve simpler problems at a smaller scale. So we have a youth summit every year where students from all over the county come from different high schools to talk to each other. And one of the questions is, what are the major issues that face young people in your high schools today? And what kinds of civic projects would you recommend that they take on to address those issues? So, and they like the idea that instead of simply expecting the adults in the school system and the community to solve those problems, that they have the opportunity and the right and really the responsibility to come up with, they need to research those problems if they care about them, and they need to come up with their own suggestions and changes of policy or actions that will help address those problems. So you mentioned mental health was one of the issues, the top issues that came up. Um, so the students this year, we have a youth service council, and they came up with an idea that after doing some research, they realized that there are lots of skills that students can learn to address anxiety and depression and stress, but that's not being taught in the schools. So they came up with a suggestion that they're going to put together uh, an outline for a semester course, an elective course that would include the kinds of skills that students might turn to. Their breathing techniques, there's meditation, there's talk therapy, there's support groups, there's all kinds of things that they want to learn about, conflict resolution, those kinds of things. And they're going to put that together and propose it to their school boards to be included as an elective course. So here these students have identified a problem. They're in the process now of doing the research and coming up with their action plan. And hopefully they're going to be able to present this to school boards. They may not get the class accepted. They understand that. It doesn't always work. Just because you do a project and try to solve a problem, it doesn't always work. But it's worth doing because they're becoming informed. They're understanding more how how the system works, which is civic intelligence. And so they're building the knowledge, skills, and values so that when they face another more complex problem, they're going to have a better idea of how to approach it.
It's, for me, when I looked at the book, I get the impression this is about you involving, the young teens and not just, you know, telling them what to do, but giving them ideas for them to take on board and to work with those ideas themselves and come up with some of their own solutions. And as you said, they're not always going to work. Some will, some won't. Some, there's going to have to be some minor adjustments to it. But that's what this is all about, your work at the Civic Education Centre and this book. So I want to go to chapters 7 and 8, systems and synergy. And I thought, this is a very good
Could I
title.
could I just go back to honor our
Of course you
ancestors?
can.
Chapter 6. I feel
Yeah.
like that's so important. I gave the example of the students who wouldn't stand for the pledge, and, and listening to them, they they don't understand. They haven't learned what past generations have done to secure the rights and the freedoms that they have now. They don't appreciate those rights and freedoms. They just assume that's what they get, and they actually just want more, and so they get angry. So we do this program called Legacy Stories, where we invite students to identify elders in the community who've made a real difference, have made a real contribution to the community. So this it could be veterans, could be law enforcement, it could be political folks like school board members, pastors, leaders in all different sectors of the community. And when they identify as a group, they identify what we call a storyteller. And then we give them a whole process of it's a storyteller guide, and they interview that person. They ask them for, what was your childhood like, and what did you work on, and what were the obstacles, and how did you deal with them? And then the last question is, what's your advice for young people? And they enter into a conversation that gets quite deep and sometimes very emotional and intense. Veterans especially have lots of trauma, lots of folks, civil rights movement. We've had students interview people who worked with Cesar Chavez and the farm workers movement. And it's not easy for them to share some of these stories, but for the first time, these young people are seeing that leaders from a past generation, and they're ordinary people from the past generation, has done amazing things responding to challenges and solving problems and working in movements to make this country a better place, this community a better place. So that connects young people with their heritage, with past generations, and they get to talk to a person who's made a difference. So these legacy stories, I think, are a very powerful strategy that we use.
I understand. And I can see why you wanted to go back there, which is absolutely fine, everyone. Um, so let's go back to, chapters 7 and 8, systems and synergy and rites of passage. Two very powerful chapters here, everybody. What are you revealing to the reader, to the audience here, John? What's the story behind the story to these two chapters?
So
Why are they there?
in our society, we tend to do linear thinking. Here's a problem. So if we do this, then this will happen, and then we can do this, and then we'll get the solution, and then we get what we want. We don't teach students to think in terms of systems. And let me just give an example. I'm working with a
Sure.
group of students at a high school, and they want to put a peace pole in their school garden, their schoolyard.
Wow.
This is a project from Rotary clubs, Rotary International. It was actually started by a guy who, as a child, survived the Hiroshima bomb. Must have had, some real protection. Grew up, became a lawyer and a Rotarian, and he convinced the Rotary International that they should have some sort of uh, symbol for promoting peace. So this poll says, "May peace prevail on earth." And so I'm working with a group of students who want to get the peace poll in their schoolyard, and they want to put benches around it, and the students are making all these decisions. I want to emphasize, I don't come in and tell them it's got to look like this or that. I ask them, what does peace mean to you? What would peace be like if this school embodied it? And they talk about, well, we have too many fights and we have discrimination and we have these issues and so on. And civil dialogue would help to make it a more peaceful campus. So they're designing this place for students to come and sit. But here's the systems part. I asked them, who do you need to ask for permission? And who makes it all come together? If they're going to put plants in, who's going to water the plants? How does that work? And so in a process of exploring those questions, they're beginning to understand their school as a system. So there's district rules, there's state rules, but their principal is pretty much in charge of their site. They want to ask the shop class if they'll build the benches, but a counselor told them you got to be careful the way you talk to the shop teacher because he doesn't like, you know, inviting students to do project. Anyway, they're learning how the system works, and they're learning where you have to be careful and the kinds of words you need to use and how you need to build allies. They were told the landscaper is going to really like this. So if you get him as an ally, you'll be much more successful. That's systems thinking.
It is, and and think of it, it's for the teens. It's about building up the community and getting them involved rather than being on the streets, in the gangs, and because that's not
Right.
good. That's not
Right.
good. So, are we okay now, John? I want to go and focus on chapters 9 and 10 here, which are again, everybody, just as exciting, just as gripping, and just as revealing. And, I found in the opening gambit of chapter 9, othering and belonging. And it's somewhat disturbing, yet somewhat comforting. Parts of these chapters are. You're talking about building power and esteem, um, making gang members feel special. And the story here, everybody, is the rock climbing adventure. So when you look at the book, you see this photograph of those, these lads rock climbing. And some of them, well, they're thinking, we can't be bothered with this. So they started to refuse and say, we're not going to cooperate there. And when you look at the story, it's about the consequences that they then had to face for their refusal. And throughout your book, you mention, and here we go again, e pluribus unum, that
Mhm.
famous saying, which translates from Latin as out of many, one, or one from many. It's the civic values, it's a breathtaking chapter. What are you talking about here?
Okay, so I spent 6 years in a school that was for we call them delinquents. They were young people who got in trouble with the law, multiple offenses, pretty serious offenses, and trying to work with them in a class was difficult. It was frustrating. We did our best, but I had a friend who I'd been backpacking with, and he convinced me that what they really needed was a wilderness experience. And so we designed a program where we took 12 boys. We did it for 2 summers. We took 12 boys from juvenile hall and we took them up in the mountains for a 2 month, 320-mile backpacking trip.
Wow.
And it was transformative. They when they came home, they were in a different worldview. But one of the problems was they were many of them were in either the Latino gang or the black gang, and there were some white kids who were they were all uh, fighting with each other, and we tried to reason with them, and they just didn't, you know, they have such strong stereotypes about, those black people or those Mexicans or whatever. So we did a rock climbing experience where one person holds the rope at the top of a cliff and the other person has a harness and backs down the cliff 50 feet below, and the person holding the rope is really holding that their life in their hands. And so what we did was put like a black kid on the top with the belay, and a Mexican kid was climbing down the rocks. And at first they refused because they didn't trust these people. And we said, well, okay, then we'll take you back to juvenile hall. And this was like the second week of the trip. So they said, all right, well, under that duress, they did it. And it really made a difference. After that, there were much fewer fights. And eventually we got to the point where we became a team. That's the e pluribus unum. They realized it was more fun and more effective. They could actually help each other cooking meals. They really cared a lot about cooking the meals. Um, and so they learned e pluribus unum, but that was one of the strategies we used.
Um, we used to go on courses, and you've just used the rock climbing example there. It's whereby you stood up in a group, and there was one person behind you, and it's would you fall freely?
Hmm.
So you're putting your trust in that person behind you to catch you.
Yeah.
Some didn't like it, some felt uncomfortable, some just got on with it, and others said, "Oh no, 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 I don't feel." And I suppose this
Yeah.
is a bit like what you've done on with the rock climbing exercise, and what you were doing on that 2 month
Yeah.
breakout up in the mountains, isn't it?
Yeah.
Learning to trust. I know your book is aimed at, it says American youth, but do you think it can apply across the world to any youths across the world?
Oh, yes. One of the chapters is on the rite of passage, and I'm referring to the passage from adolescence into early adult development.
Mm.
So we have, adolescence is a challenging time. You get these impulses, you're wanting to get pleasure, you're wanting to compete, you're wanting to explore power and relationships and all this stuff, um, and test, which is normal, and that's as it should be. And we need schools and other institutions to help guide students through that stage. But that hopefully there's going to be a transition where they outgrow those impulses and they accept the responsibility of participating in the civic life of their city and their state and the nation and the world. So that's the transition that I'm interested in, because I think that's really the role of high school, is to prepare students to go through some sort of rite of passage where they become responsible adults. Many tribes do this all over the world. Um, the Maasai, there are other tribes that have this kind of rite of passage, but in the Western world, we tend to just say, well, if you graduate from high school, when you get to a certain age, you can drink and do drugs, and you can vote, and now you're an adult. And the student hasn't really done anything except get through high school to be considered an adult. There's no challenge. There was no uh, initiative that they took. So I'm thinking that this civic engagement project method, if it was if it was endorsed by and included in high schools all around the world, it'll help young people to understand that they have agency. They can either help or hinder the kinds of communities that they're a part of, large and small. And so, and we have a showcase at the end of the year. So the top 15 civic engagement projects, um, we have the students get up on stage and do a PowerPoint or a video presentation of why they were concerned about their issue and what they did to help solve that problem. And there are, 300 people in a theater audience, and these kids feel acknowledged. They feel like, wow, we did make a difference. And to me, that's a rite of passage where the public is acknowledging these contributions. And so that's what the chapter on rite of passage was about.
It was. So let's go finally to chapters 11 and 12, John. And you head them as Apology to Youth and Creating Our Future. In chapter 11, your first paragraph is an apology to students for the huge mess we, the older generation, are leaving you. Hmm. And in chapter 12, you quote Alexander Hamilton, one of the founding fathers of America. The fabric of American empire ought to rest on the solid basis of the consent of the people. The streams of national power ought to flow immediately from that pure original fountain of all legitimate authority. What are you saying to the readers and to the young people here in these last two chapters?
I'm saying that they face issues that are more complex and in many ways more dangerous than the issues that my generation faced. We had World War One and World War Two, and that's probably the best example of coming together as one when the United States and Great Britain did that. They came together as one and they won those wars. But we've been relatively stable since then. The economy's been relatively smooth, and we have experienced great sense of freedom and opportunity. But things are changing, and young people now are afraid they can't buy a house, and they're afraid the economy's not stable, and they see the government in gridlock. The polarization is such that all the Republicans are on one side, all the Democrats are on one side, and who barely wins an election gets the power to run the country, and that doesn't feel safe for students or me. But the point is, they're going to have to deal with some issues like climate change, the wars that are going on. There's no agency in the world that is managing international relations who can help enforce treaties and stop wars. Um, there are lots of problems. I mean, species extinction, um, economic issues, trade wars. These are very complex, and to me, they're more severe, I guess, than they have been in the past. And I think the world civilization is going through a transition, and so I apologize. It's not personal, but I think our generation hasn't done a good job of preparing them to understand these challenges and to be able to address those challenges.
I think you're right. I wouldn't want to be a young person today. Nope. What they are facing, I mean, some of them will never buy a house because the house prices are just astronomical. Jobs, there's no careers anymore for a lot of them. There's a lot of instability and uncertainty around in the world. So no, I think both you and I are glad we were born when we were and not now, not being teens.
But there's another side to that I
Mhm.
emphasize in the book, and that is, um, yes, the problems are more severe, um, but the younger generation also has the benefit of the wisdom of past generations in creating in our country, the United States and the Constitution and the laws since then that extend rights to more people. We ended slavery. Women got the right to vote. African Americans got the right to vote in the 60s, and we were able to make the changes that we saw that needed to be made. And the government that has been created by our ancestors allows for that. In fact, encourages that, and we have a responsibility to uh, focus on that. You mentioned the power needs to come from the people. Um, Alexander Hamilton's one of his quotes is, "The sense of the community shall govern." And think about what's the sense of the community? Is there a sense of Great Britain? Is there a sense of America? Is there a sense of Fresno? Or in a classroom, if you've got 30 students and a teacher, is there a sense of the class? In other words, is it possible for us to have some agreements and identify some common ground in terms of our thoughts and our feelings and our concerns and our hopes, um, for the kind of world we want to live in? That's the sense of the community. And Hamilton was saying that's what should govern, the sense of the community. And then in a representative democracy, you vote for people who will represent that sense, who will represent those ideas in the various levels of government. But we don't talk to students about the sense of the community. Um, One of the things, we have this youth service council, and when we talk to students, the motto of the youth service council is, "We are creating our future." And students don't really believe that until they participate in some kind of civic engagement project where they actually identify a problem, do the research,
Mm.
implement a solution, and then they realize that they have the power to make a difference. And it's really only then that they can even conceptualize the idea of creating their future. That if they want a future where they feel safe, where they're healthy, where they're free, then they need to be looking at ways to make their systems, their schools, their communities reflect those desires for the future. And they can actually do projects that help create that future. So that's very different from those students who
Oh, it's very
refuse to
different.
stand for the
Yeah.
pledge.
And this is what the book is about, everybody. It's a thought-provoking book. So go and have a look at these 12 chapters, for, as an adult, but for teens, particularly teens, to think about things and how they can support their own community. This is what the work of the Civic Education Centre is about, and this is what the book, which is written in conjunction with John's work, is about. Now, I'm intrigued. You've done one book, you're going to do another book.
That's a good question. I have ideas for books, but I don't know yet.
So we have to
I,
wait and
I
see.
am thinking about doing a podcast with the Civic Education Center. We're actually planning to start giving quarterly podcasts starting in June.
Okay.
So go to the website and find out what that's going to be like.
So as I said, so you can get the book from Amazon on the link that is accompanies the written introduction of this podcast interview, and also from the web page from Civic Education Centre, their web page. You can get it from there or make a donation. So I hope we've given you a little bit of insight as to what Dr. John Minkler's book is about and why it's come about and its whole theory and what it's there for. All I say is go and buy it, go and have a look. So I simply want to say now to Dr. John Minkler from Fresno in California, thank you very much for coming on my show. It's been thoroughly enjoyable having a look at your book and chatting to you over the last few weeks.
Thank you.
I'm JT Crowley. Thanks for listening wherever you're in the world. Until next time, stay safe.